George, I'm going to ask a question that Peter and I talked about of clarity, and he'll come in and talk a little bit.
Where is he?
Yeah,
I suspect, because he knows I'm going to ask.
he was in the hallway
Yeah.
talking to.
We'll slowly call this meeting back to order as soon as Peter returns from wherever he's gone.
Hinterlands.
I had to scoot, so I went for lunch. Nathan was doing that very responsibly, and Roger greeted.
It seems like nobody met, yeah.
Mike, you had a question?
Yes, I'd like Peter, if he would, step to the microphone. My question is this. What I would like to do is to move, but not in its present form, the motion for the stay. But my goal, my desire, is to have it so there's clarification when the board votes what they're voting for. So, for example, to me, what's very, very clear is 6th grade, 9th grade, those sort of things occur. And I think it's very, very important that there's clarity. So that's my goal of what continues and what does not continue. So, Peter, I asked you that a little bit. I think you get the gist of my question.
Yeah. Board members, the meat of this is what matters a little bit less than the procedure in terms of whether you're going to say, I move this resolution and amend it this way, or we want to not adopt this resolution and instead we're going to move an alternative that is accomplishing what you're after. What is most important is that when you bring your motion, with as much clarity as you can, bullet point fashion, make sure your fellow board members understand what are the terms that you're moving. And then you can discuss that, and then you can discuss further amendments to it and discuss all of those things. I don't know if any of the board is interested in moving the resolution without an amendment and then start it that way. If no one is comfortable with it in its current form, I would suggest moving as amended all in one breath, so to speak. I don't know that we get too hooked up on parliamentary procedures as long as it's clear what it is that you're after, you've considered what they've presented, and you're going to make your decision whether it's exactly that or something different, or it's no to that.
Yes.
Does that help at all?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess I'm looking for
Motion.
a resolution, yeah.
Or resolution, and I will move that. The ones that, to me, are very clear, but I would encourage other board members here, if they have ones that are very clear, that they add to that list. And if they're challenged, somebody says, no, that is or not, then we can talk about it. But I would move the stay. And a couple of items that strike me as very, very clear is, one, the 9th graders going to the high school, the 6th graders going to the middle schools. To me, those are very, very clear. But, go ahead.
So I wonder if you don't instead want to list the things that would be included in the stay. You know what I mean? Instead of, because aren't you saying the transition would still happen? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
What about the boundary adjustments for those?
And I think that was one where we weren't in agreement.
But
So
I mean-
I wouldn't put that one in there.
So, but if you're moving 6th graders and 9th graders, do you not do boundary adjustments?
Well, I think you could do the 6th grade, 9th graders, there's no boundary.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about 6th
The
graders.
6th graders, I think at this point, that is a question, because the feeder schools becomes a question there.
I understand that you're trying to get clarity on what we would vote on. I get that. But what I'm struggling with is Mr. Kanak has brought forth the arguments that represent his people, the concerns of his people. And if we change the stay to mean something different, are we responding to your request?
Which of us are you?
To Mr. Knox? If he sent us a document with his two arguments of why he's asking us to make a stay. And he also sent us the resolution that fits with representing the concerns of his clients. But if we as a board now start creating our own, it may not address the concerns of Mr. Knox's people.
If I may. If the board is willing to grant a stay, the board decides what the terms of the stay are. And then Mr. Kanak decides whether that satisfies his clients or whether they want to go to the Court of Appeals to make some adjustment in that. I think what's most important is, having listened to Mr. Kanak and their arguments, whether you want to do a stay at all, and if you do, what it is you're willing to stay. He's made his ask, and if you want to give him everything he's asked for, the main point I have to make is be very clear about what that means. And you may need to go through some bullet points like Board Member Potacek was talking about. And you may ask him, I guess I'm not sure if you can during your discussion period, but I would think it'd be worth asking him if these are things here, is there anything that they were still asking for that's not? So you know, if you can't tell if you're denying part of his request or not, I think I'd ask him. But I think it's most important for you to make your own determination based on your own deliberations, if you're willing to stay, and if so, what is it you're willing to stay? And then it's up to Mr. Kanak and his client to decide whether that satisfies them or whether they'd like the Court of Appeals to intervene. And then we'll be in front of the Court of Appeals, and I will be defending whatever decision you've made.
Yeah. Okay, so having heard that, then maybe Tom was hinting at that too, maybe I need to proceed from the other direction. And what the stay is, for example, would be boundaries. There would be a stay on those. Another stay would be on any sale of the buildings. That would be a stay. A stay would be on actions that led to the closing of the buildings or the closing of those elementaries.
A stay would be on the closing
Well, you
of the-
stop doing it or,
Or you don't do it.
yeah, you don't do it.
Well, that's the proposal itself. So does that have
Well, I
to?
think it's a stay on the sale of the building, so you wouldn't proceed with any sale, I think is what.
Yeah.
But that all the other stuff would go forward?
Well, I'm trying to
Yeah.
be inclusive at this point, so that,
I agree with you. I'm trying to wrestle, and that's why I was asking this questions about, to me, there's a difference between implementation and planning. And, you know, we don't know what the decision, if it comes back that we're good, we've planned for it, I think that's fiscally responsible for, as I look at, for my constituents, that we've planned for this. Implementation, that's problematic in the sense if you do lose that, you probably have gone down a road that may be difficult to unwind. So,
see,
you know.
and part of what I heard tonight, and it's justified. I mean, people are looking at this and they're planning, they're going to prevail. And obviously those who support Bold very strongly are saying, we're going to prevail, so that enters in how they look at it. But then if you go to the opposite side, which who knows who's going to
Right.
prevail, and you say, look, if the planning can't start till January or if it can't start till February, but you know, it goes the other way, then you got to scramble too. So I mean, regardless, you're hedging your bets.
right. And
And
that's,
so
for
what
me,
I'm-
planning seems less of a concern than implementation.
But I think the point that Mr. Canuck was making is that for a lot of families, that is like implementation. You start down a path and then you have to turn around and come
Yep.
back. So
No, I completely understand where he's coming from. Kathy, can I ask you a question? I'm not too clear on this issue of our contractual obligations with regards to if we stay this, what ramifications are we looking at from our contracts?
I don't know that I have a perfect answer for you, Tom, because it's all going to depend on the timing. If it's a January and we're done, we probably can still do things quickly and get them done. It does mean that we're going to have to stop or may have to slow what we're doing on our work with the teachers and getting people transitioned to buildings. For example, if the 3 buildings are going to close, those people would have transferred into existing buildings. If the building's not going to be closed and we have to plan, then we're going to plan to open the elementary and still have all those staff, so you still have all of those staff who would have moved into buildings versus on top of those buildings. So some of those are, and a lot of it depends on the timing.
So the earlier the better, right?
Yeah. And I think, Kathy, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, if it does get resolved by the end of the year, fine, but the longer it goes, the more difficult it makes it. But I think in the way Mr. Michael explained that, the dilemma is we want people, when we leave, to know very clearly, I voted against the stay or I voted for it, but we all agree on what was in there.
Yeah, I think the other piece that relates to staffing is, if you look at the multi-grades and things that we've talked about that we're putting in place for this year and not doing those things, we're planning for next year on the assumption that this will be happening and we'll be able to continue that. So you have to decide, is our decisions this year, what is our staffing decisions going to be next year, and what do we do it this year if that's going to be stayed?
And
You can't do it next year.
Yeah, and that's, you're linking the two together.
Correct.
Does
Which
it
you have to, because I would tell you that I don't think we would be working to eliminate or reduce significantly the multi-grade if we didn't think we could continue it next year. And we cannot do that if those buildings remain open. So those are the kinds of impacts, so you don't know what to plan for staffing next year.
But even, just to be the foil on that, but even if you did go with the redemptive measure that you proposed and you don't prevail, it comes out the other way anyway, where you have to readjust.
Where we would have had those staff, correct.
So what else, does anybody have any other things they would put in there, or?
What is in there?
I think we talked about boundaries.
Okay.
What does that mean? We would not do any boundaries, or we would?
We would.
We would not do boundaries assuming school closures. We'd still have to do boundaries with the new elementary attendance lines, correct?
And with the 6th grade transition.
We would have to do boundaries for the entire district.
Unless you delayed those until January. So,
Right.
and Mr. Canuck said you could put a date on it, he thought.
I thought he said we couldn't.
I thought he came back and said we could do kind of what we wanted. Do you want?
Pretty much.
If the decision is that, you could put a January date, but if it hasn't gone to the Court of Appeals, then I think he commented that we'd be back doing the same thing.
So, and we've said this, boundaries would need to be done. Again, just a consideration is we have, and it's open all year round, but we have an enrollment window from October to January 15th for kind of that first draw, that first lottery draw. I don't know, and I'm actually going to turn to Kathy, because as she was talking and I was thinking about, the numbers that I get now, and she staffs based on the projected enrollment that I'm receiving, based on even those applications this year. That's how it's done. Do we have sections set up at schools where parents make a decision or don't make a decision, and all of a sudden something changes, and now we've staffed, and can we move that staff to a different site? I don't know contractually if we can or can't do that. I don't know that.
What usually happens is there's a process where we do seniority by building. If we're short positions in a building, for example, the least senior person would have to transfer to another building. So we would follow the contractual processes that are there. One of the things I think that goes with what Kristen's saying, though, is even right now, we're kind of waiting to see how the boundaries fall out because we anticipate that people are going to want to move for next year, and our staffing is kind of, we've told principals to be prepared to be flexible depending on what parents choose. So our staffing right now is in flux based on waiting for boundary information. So that's impacted as well.
So to be clear, just to paraphrase, make sure that I'm understanding correctly, if the board approved a stay, then essentially the resolution would be taken off because we would not try to mitigate and address those multi-gradings because there's, in the reality, not sufficient enough evidence that we could continue that into the following school year. So we would have potentially up to 10 multi-grading situations for the following year.
I would defer to Superintendent Pontrelli, but I would say that in all of our planning, it's been assumed that if we can't continue it next year, we will not do it this year.
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify for me,
Right now, when we've just finished the staffing, we've looked at our numbers, and because of our configuration and how our kids fall, based on what we've done for last year, we'd have 8 to 10 multi-grade sections. And a lot of that is due to the configurations in the lower numbers. And so when you consolidate or close the schools, you have more sections, and it lowers the impact of that. So if we are going to be doing that, I wouldn't want to go out and say, all right, we're not going to multi-grade this year, and then do it again the next year.
so if we put a stay on it and we wait for the Court of Appeals decision,
Then we will multi-grade.
Then
for
you
next
will
year.
multi-grade
Our
next
recommendation
year.
would be that we multi-grade.
because what you're, if I understand correctly, and it's that triple, your goals, sustainability, feasibility, and desirability. And so what you're seeking is that sustainability for that finance piece.
Correct.
So if
And
we
if-
do the stay, then
We'll recommend that we multi-grade, and we'll have multi-grades next year, 8 to 10.
and how many, do you recall how many buildings that's in?
Just about every building.
And have they been informed already that they will not have multi-grading?
Yes. Principals have met with staff. We're actually posting next Tuesday. So with the understanding that we do not have multi-grade. So if that is a change, we have less positions open and available for postings next Tuesday.
But again, there's two wild cards out there. And one is the whole idea that bold will prevail in the courts. And then also, I think what Fritz also mentioned is the number of parents out there who are going to fear this. And because of that, you got 400 kids at least that are in flux. Now, whether it's going to be more than that or less than that is a question mark. But you're caught in somewhat the same dilemma that you talked about. I mean, it's a tough time either way to plan the future.
I guess I'm still waiting for a motion.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what else we could put in there that would clearly, is it appropriate to ask Fritz or Peter?
I think that has to be determined by us.
I think it would help coming from us, but if that's the limit there,
So Peter, that's what you said earlier, is it appropriate that we make the motion and then ask Mr. Knock if he would like to add any more, or can we ask now if there's things he would want in there?
I think that the board needs to decide what it's willing to do. Say clearly what that is. Move it, second it, if there's a second. Discuss it. And if part of your discussion is we think we are doing what he asked on this piece and we're not sure, I don't see any reason why you couldn't have a dialogue with him. And if you needed to make some minor amendment to be more careful about what you've said, that kind of exchange can happen. But I believe the board needs to, a member needs to bring some kind of motion, be clear about what it is you're moving, and then have discussion on whether or not to vote on that or amend it or whatever. I don't know if that made it any clearer at all.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I would make the motion at the minimum to include those, the closing of schools, of boundaries.
I'm sorry, I just need a little more clarification. When the stay would, what?
Well, the way I understand it, Kathy, there are certain adjustments, changes you cannot make until the stay's removed. So if we were going to vote that this is the resolution, these would be areas that they'd have to leave as they presently are.
So no boundary changes and, okay, if that's what you mean, I just want to be clear.
Yeah, and I'm trying to, I guess, reach into other people's minds as well on this board and say, are there other areas that I'm leaving out that we could say, you know, would be areas that we stay as they are, and basically.
Well, I'm going to just speak to the boundary piece because I was the board member on that boundary committee, and I think people left there and have emailed me since then to say we should move forward with the boundaries, particularly for people looking, and I'm just trying to recall here some of the emails, looking forward to kindergarten next year. They want to know where they can go for kindergarten. I know the principals on the committee spoke passionately about wanting to have their open houses and start their transitions and start bringing people in and work with their staff. So I'd be reluctant to include boundaries, and that's probably the heart of the matter, really.
So is there a motion on the table? Mike, are we
think
still?
it's
Well, what I'm
But
doing.
it's not full, it's not
Yeah,
complete.
what I'm trying to do is give people to put the opportunity in there. If they don't, then I'll move the original
Okay.
motion.
Okay.
But I'm saying why, and my point is not to pressure you or encourage you. I mean, I have feelings which way I would go, but to say, one of my goals is just clarity. What are we voting for or what are we voting against? And again, I think that was some of the original questions of what Fritz proposed, is that there wasn't as much clarity as there needed to be.
So you're saying boundaries and sale of the buildings.
And I think another part of that was closing of schools. Those three come to me. I'm open to thoughts, modifications.
Chair Hepner, if I may, I would suggest, and if I've got this right, to see if I can expedite.
Thank you.
Board Member Potashnik is moving a stay as amended to prohibit boundary adjustments, sales of buildings, or closing any of the elementary schools, but excluding from the stay anything about ninth graders moving to high schools or sixth graders moving to middle schools. If that's what you're moving, I'd say so moved, then you guys can second or not and have a discussion.
Yes. Thank you.
Did you say so?
So are you moving
I
it
will
the
move
way
that.
he stated it?
Exactly. He took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay, so if it's not, Peter, if I may, if it's not stated, which side of the, and I'll go back to my Spanish immersion gate, all those, are they in or out if it's not stated in the proposal?
We can keep planning those.
We can
Correct.
keep planning for anything that's not in the proposal.
As he stated it, that's correct. And of
Is that
course,
what you
as you
intended?
discussed, you're free to amend.
Yeah, because the way I understand that, George, and I think Superintendent Pontrelli mentioned that gate in its present form is fine. They would have difficulty if they tried to expand it, but I'm not ruling that you can't do that.
So it's boundary, sale of building, closing of schools. That's what you moved on, correct?
Correct.
And I guess I would probably support that if you modified it to implementing boundary adjustments. I agree with George. We have to recognize what that committee did. And, again, I think that, it's playing both sides against the middle to say, well, you're planning and so people are going to leave. And if you don't, they might stay. I think people are smart enough to say, we're not implementing them, we're planning for them, we're hoping for whatever. You may win, you may lose, but to recognize, and we've all received the emails from people asking us to go forward with that, I'd be willing to support this. But I think you have to go forward with at least planning the boundary adjustments.
I'd be open to that, Tom.
So if I've got it right, it's a stay that closes school, stay the closing of the schools, stay the sale of the 3 school buildings, and
Stays implementation of boundary adjustments.
it
But you would-
stays the implementation?
but you
Yeah,
would be-
but you could plan.
You could plan and we could adopt the boundary adjustments next month. And I guess I'm open to hear from the staff on what the ramifications of what we're recommending here. Any,
I'm assuming I'm staff, seeing everybody's looking at me. Again, I'll ask Dr. McDowell to speak on the kind of the principal side of the world and what that means in the buildings. What alls I would reiterate is I think if going forward where you could plan, then that, what it does is parents can make their personal decisions on what's best for their children and their family based on the information they have. And so that would allow, it would still happen anyway. The alternate and open enrollment process happens regardless, but at least there's a little bit more information available for people to do that. So I'm going to ask Bob to speak to, as far as a principal perspective on what that means.
I think the thing to consider is that it isn't just boundaries. So if you're going to, what you're doing is if you're saying that you're going to continue to plan for the boundaries moving into 17, 18, then are we going to also plan these transition and tours and all of that stuff, not knowing what the outcome is?
And that's the question I have, because to me, that negates the stay. There's really no
yeah.
stay then, right?
I realize that, and as Kristen pointed out, I'm confident that regardless of what happens, we can figure out how to, it's not about whether it will or won't happen. It's to what degree will it or won't it happen. And that's just, the gist of it's going to be how much and how well can we plan moving forward. So it's to me, the boundary discussion, and I think it was alluded to a little bit earlier, is if you agree to continue on in the planning of the boundaries, then you are in essence saying you're going to agree to do all the other stuff as well, because if you're going to have those families say they're going to alternate enroll a year early, then I want to make sure that we've got our staffs and our building principals and all of our families in that transition mode. And I guess that's what you're saying, is you're going to task us to do that, not knowing
Yeah.
whether schools are going to be
Knowing
closed
what
or
the
not.
decision will be.
And that's, regardless, that's the dilemma you're in of
That's the
uncertainty.
dilemma, correct.
Regardless of who prevails. And the sad state of affairs for parents is the uncertainty.
Well, and so then is it better to halt even the planning of the boundaries, but put a date on it? Then we have to revisit that. We can revisit that and not continue the stay, but it would give them a little time, and I don't know.
Well, had you proposed it as an amendment?
Yes.
Would you accept it as an
Yes.
amendment? Okay. I don't think we got a second to your, would you?
Well, let me ask one other question, Bob or whoever. If there was a lesser of two evils, which would you prefer?
It makes me nervous to work and promise something that we don't know that we're going to be able to deliver, I guess is the way I would answer that. I'm trying to wrap my head around how we would.
But how do you plan, I mean, going forward, if we say no to the stay and we plan
Yep.
and we lose, what does that do?
You're in the same boat.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to, so I'm
So-
trying to figure out what allows us to be mindful of all of our kids and their families and making decisions. I think we'll succeed, but, you know, I don't have a crystal ball. What helps the administration, staff, teachers, all of that in this ugly process that we're in?
So if we said by the end of the year, would that be too much? Or
What are you doing by the end of the
if
year?
we said, don't plan until January 1, would that allow you to have enough time to do boundaries, staffing?
Well, I think with
Easy
the,
to-
so with the transit, for us, it's going to have less impact on us with the transitioning thing, as I think, again, as I'm trying to keep up with all the, kind of how we're thinking about this. The biggest impact either way is going to be on the families having to make a decision, right? Because what we were working on with principals to this point is figuring out before the end of this school year, what makes sense to have tours and transitions for those families, just so people could make the best informed decision possible. Could we do that in the fall? Absolutely, you could do that in the fall. You could probably do something over the summer. I mean, we'd figure that part out of it. I have less concern about that than I do about the impact on the family. I wonder with the boundaries, if this is the direction we're going, what we would want to consider is having a contingency plan both ways. I mean, if that's really, if that's, you know, do you bring, if the idea is you're going to plan for the boundaries as they are, or you wait, I don't know.
Good point.
I think that, you know, what Bob had said is we can make a lot of things happen, and we have a lot of people who, I know that Kristen and Mark working with the boundary team have said, you know, if we have to come back and make a contingency plan or another plan, we'll do that. Where I think it makes me nervous is when you look at the first slide, that our work to improve student results, working with teachers to have those student results. When we look at the bold proposals there, and then also the Bridge to Excellence, that's a lot of planning and a lot of work and a lot of things that are not separate. They're all interconnected. And so when you're doing that work, what we've heard over and over is, how do you implement it well in the classroom? How do we give teachers time? How do we, you know, do this really well? And that was one of the things when we looked at this was, we have actually the gift of time to be able to do that well. So I just want to make sure that you understand with all these things, it's the quantity of things. I mean, many districts moving to a 6th grade model, 9th grade model, new elementary school, all of the changes we're having, take on 1 or 2 of those things at a time. not all of these. So it really is about the implementation of doing it well. That's my concern more than anything. Can we do it? Many things we can do. How well we do it and how much time we give families to work on that transition is really the question for me.
But is that dependent on if we say no to the stay or to a stay?
Well, I think that's what Bob was trying to share earlier. If we say, if we're going to go ahead and and say, yes, we're going to go ahead like we had normally planned, then principals will offer opportunities this summer and this fall, and kids will start making trips to different schools, all those kind of things. We aren't going to do that if we say no. I mean,
But if we say we're not going to close the building, or we're not going to sell the building, and everything else can go forward with your planning,
sure.
So we could make a boundary decision next month based on the recommendation. So families would know.
that's what I'm suggesting. that-
The only qualification I'd make, and with all due respect, I think what you can't do is promise. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. You can't say, hey, this is the way it's going to be. You can say, I hope this is the way it's going to be. But again, I think everybody's in agreement. There's not certainty.
Yeah,
And
that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And I think
No,
what
I
you,
want everything
you
to
did
go
say that
Everything else, I'm just saying.
may be good is that if there's a contingency, then you have,
Yeah.
you know,
Plan.
right?
Let it go.
If this, then that.
Sleep.
And the only reason I brought that up is to get at the idea of, could you plan for something? You know, I think what it comes down to is if the board votes to not stay it, as an administration, what we have to then assume is that we're moving forward as planned. And so we will continue with the assumptions in that planning. If the board decides to stay it, whatever that takes, then that just puts us in a different direction. At a minimum, slows us down, and at a maximum, stops certain parts of it, right?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Because we're not saying no to bold.
Right.
We're just saying, we don't know what the Court of Appeals or the district court or whatever. So is it easier to plan for contingencies with a stay or without a stay? And when I say with a stay, I'm talking about what we discussed where we would stay any closing of the buildings till the decision is made, or the sale of the buildings, but pretty much planning would go forward. Planning for boundary adjustments, the 6th grade, 9th grade, all of that would go forward.
And I think it goes back to that it's the impact on the families, and I guess maybe what you look at is, depending upon what the families believe is going to happen, is going to dictate whether they even come to the tours or they don't come to the tours, right? Or they enroll they're planning a year out to enroll their kindergartner in the building they think they will be going to. So I think it's going to be hard to judge on either side. It's kind of like you've mentioned before. It's a 50-50. There is no good
Right.
no good solution.
That's what I'm wrestling with is, yeah, families are going to have to plan, but they'd have to plan either way because we have these lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if we didn't, we know where we're at. But I think it might be prudent to keep going forward with the planning and, you know, knowing in the back of your mind, you could lose, you could win. But at least if you win, you know, we have moved forward on all of this. But I'm not the expert, so I'm trying to figure this out.
And for us, when it comes to a planning standpoint, it's a matter of how much planning are you going to scrunch into what amount of time, and then what can all of your outside entities that need to participate, how much time do they have to do that? In this case, it's our families and our kids, and how much time we have to transition them. However, all the time in the world, if we plan to transition those families and they don't make a choice because of what's going on, then it was for naught anyway. So I don't know that you're going to come to a good solution on which way you lean on it, because it's until we know for sure, like you pointed out.
Peter, can I ask you a question? Could we lift the stay at any point? If it was our stay and the Court of Appeals didn't weigh in or anything like that, do we have the ability, if something came up and we said, you know what, this stay is not working for whatever reason, could we as a board lift that stay?
The short answer is I don't believe so. Under the rules, they're entitled to seek a stay pending the appeal. If you were to grant a stay conditioned on reserving the right to yank that from them, I think they would have the opportunity to ask the Court of Appeals to look at that and take away that condition. I don't think that would be within the spirit of anything the Court of Appeals would have ever experienced in terms of a stay pending appeal.
Would you say the same about saying, like, by December 31st?
From my perspective as your lawyer in the case, I would be concerned about a date that ends the stay other than when the appeals are over. The point of the stay is to cover the period of uncertainty. To arbitrarily set a date that is possibly less than that or moot because it was longer than that doesn't serve the purpose completely. And we're maybe, as I was kind of joking with Fritz a moment ago, talking about this on Christmas. I mean, I don't think that provides the certainty, the comfort that they'd be looking for, that we want this period of uncertainty covered with either we're going to do something or we're not. So I, speaking as a lawyer, would be concerned about putting a date on it other than it's as long as the appeals are in place.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to try to move us.
No,
ahead.
I wonder, and if we're getting not bogged down by some of the minutia, but to me, I think it's more straightforward. The decision before us is, are we going to move forward with the plan that the majority of the board passed and allow our superintendent and her team to take the time necessary to implement well, to be really intentional with staff for trainings, for workshops, for, and of course our families with open houses and such? Or are we willing to risk just having an impasse and an impediment of where we just kind of stop time? And so I think, to me, that's more of the fundamental question. Are we going to move forward or are we not? I mean, and I don't mean to winnow it down so, to be so crass, but I'm wondering, is that more of the elementary question before us?
Yeah, and I think earlier, someone said this wouldn't affect the bold, but I think that's what this is really about. So.
You mean the bond?
No, I mean the bold. I mean, improving the services for kids, balancing class sizes. It's the multi-grade thing. I think that is what this is about. And I think what we're being asked is to put a hold on that and stop and wait until that decision is made. So I know that your request is for the closing of the buildings, but I think it's got broader implications for the entire district. And that's the educational services that we're providing, so.
I guess the perspective I see it from is and I'm not the one doing all of the legwork, but that it would be easier to wait a few months before implementing than what if we did lose and then we have to backtrack everything. To me, that just feels like we more parents would have gone this far and then have to go back than we're kind of just waiting to see where we're going to go. Does that make sense?
And I guess I have just the alternate perspective, or just to see it a little differently in terms of, I think, having the confidence that we have done our due diligence and followed the letter of the law, and we have met all the legal and statute requirements that, I mean, I'm assuming that we're going to move forward successfully. So,
We've got a motion. I think it was amended, but I don't know that we ever got a second.
I can second it.
Okay. Is
Could it be repeated? Just so we...
Well, Peter,
Let's get good.
either you or Mike, I know you're probably the only two
If
that
I
are
had to
sure.
make the choice, I'd choose Peter.
As I have it, the motion as amended is to stay closing of the schools, stay sale of the building, stay implementation of boundary changes, but permit planning to go forward, even including boundaries, permit ninth grade to move to high school, sixth grade to move to middle school. And that's as far as we have.
Could we decide on boundaries next month, based on the recommendation that's before us?
As I understand, and maybe this is worth talking about vocabulary-wise, what I understood the difference between planning and implementation is what you're doing next month is planning for what will happen 2 or 3 school years down the road, not implementing it. I think that would not be stayed, and
Yeah,
it's
that's the
your
way I
motion,
would
so.
say it too. Is it appropriate at this point to ask Fritz to comment on that in terms of the clarity and?
I believe that's a question for the chair.
Okay.
Do you want him? Do you want to listen?
Please, yeah.
Fritz? Mr. Canuck? You've been here long enough, I feel like I know you.
He knows you as Mr. Chair, so.
Mr. Chair, yes, we're not intimate, but yes. Mr. Chairman, for one thing, I do appreciate the reference earlier in this process to my people. Made me feel a little like Moses, I guess, but I was corrected, though. I had seen a hard list, I thought, but where I had mentioned 200, actually it's closer to 1,800. So I want to correct myself for the record in terms of the associated members of the organization. So the question was, I'm sorry?
Well, I think you've heard the motion.
Sure.
And our attempt was to give it clarity so that this board knows, and hopefully it works in the interest of both attorneys. We're pretty clear on what we're voting for or against.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm saying, does it match up with what your clients?
To a significant degree, if I can respond in terms of what we like or don't like. Obviously, closing of schools, a stay on the sale, but we would interpret that, at least I'm anticipating, I would hear that we would interpret that to include active marketing of the schools during the period of the stay. A stay in the planning. And I I would say that
Stay in
for
planning.
me,
What do you mean by
implementation-
planning?
I'm on that issue. I would view a vote on, I would view, others may disagree in the group that I'm talking and representing, talking for and representing, but I would view a vote on the boundary as something more than planning. And so I would say that at least as I would interpret it, a stay on what the proposal is, what the staff is, and what the staffing is. And I would suggest to you that, quite honestly, if you are talking about voting on boundaries, you need to wait to see who's left after, if there's an adverse decision, who's left to plan about. And I just think that it's not realistic to engage, as I indicated before, in planning right now, given the possible consequences. So actively adopting, I mean, you can adopt, as I muttered quite loudly before, you can basically do what you want in terms of the restrictions. I respectfully disagree, at least I think I disagree, with what was said in terms of putting a time limit on it. I think that that's not unreasonable from your perspective. If you're saying, okay, well, we'll give you until December 31st as part of our stay, and if the process goes beyond that, well, then that's it. We have our own reasons, and and I would suggest that that kind of thing would be something that my client could live with. I think what you're proposing is maybe the half a loaf that would be acceptable to my client. the thing that makes me itchy is defining planning as actually, I would say if there's a vote, a positive vote on boundaries, that's well into the implementation of the, but if that's what you decide, and that's the only disagreement we have, then it's possible maybe that that would be something we could live with.
Now, having said that, if we went with what Shelley talked about, putting like a date to December 31st, and Fritz, I'm going to switch to staff a little bit on this question. That, from what I heard, that's more workable than it was if it was indefinite and went a month or two later. Now, maybe that's begging the question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I can
apologize.
speak to the piece right now for me that's like immediate need is the whole multi-grading thing, and if that's going to be on hold, because that literally would need to be changed tomorrow when I go back to work to redo the staffing to multi-grade because of the unknown. If that's a direction we're going to move, that's the piece for me that right now is probably the key. And if I can just veer off, just slightly off topic on that, another piece I think you're going to want to be, when you look from the principal's perspective, if you're going to define things, when I look at planning for the middle school, there's a difference between moving sixth graders to the middle school and planning for a middle school model that may have utilized savings from the closings of the schools. And is it okay for us to plan a middle school model, or does that stop as well? That would be another piece. Principals are beginning that work.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to the whole point of if we don't prevail.
Yeah, I'm just saying, in your resolution or your list, I think it'll be important that we're clear on what are we doing as far as sixth grade. Are we planning for a different model, or are we simply moving sixth grade?
Yeah. Kristen wanted to say something.
Well, from my areas of responsibility, the first would be the boundary piece. And again, back to the families. Just listening to the conversation, and I don't know if this is appropriate, but I know we had talked about procedurally at the boundary committee level, procedurally, how does my office handle things? I would be very confused in looking for guidance from legal as far as if the board were to formalize a recommendation, and regardless of what that recommendation looked like, and I now hit January, and there is no Court of Appeals decision, I don't even have a boundary that exists, because I can't default to today's boundary, and I can't implement a future boundary. I don't know how I would do that. So that would be one thing that I would hope someone could say what that really looks like. But that would, and then I've talked about the impact. As far as budgeting goes, what I would presume, and given the timeline, is if there is a stay to date specific, I would have to start planning and working with administrative teams, principals, whatever, on a reduction list. And maybe that would be done anyway, to start preparing for if we are in reduction mode as opposed to are we in recapturing some money mode. So that would be kind of my areas of responsibility.
Thank you.
We have a motion, we have a second. I think Peter laid out what we have in it. Does anybody need more time before we vote?
The only thing I would ask for, and I don't know if it's appropriate to make a amendment, is the active marketing. I can leave the boundaries as Tom proposed them. But I would add active marketing to the list.
To the
Okay.
stay.
To stay.
So the stay becomes closure of school, sale and active marketing of the school, and.
Or of the building, and maybe that's semantics. Go ahead.
Okay, and a stay on the implementation of the boundaries. That's it. Peter, you have a comment, I'll bet.
Mr. Chair, in light of Mr. Knak's comment about what implementation versus planning means, I think that you should be clear about what you mean by it, whether that means you can vote and et cetera, and implementation is the school year it starts, or implementation is things like taking votes. Some language to make clear which way you're coming down on what he had said.
That was going to be my question, because I think there's, in my mind, complete confusion in terms of the definition of planning and implementation, as I heard Mr. Canuck speak to that. And so either we really lay that out before we take a vote, or we eliminate
I
that
think it's a
piece
good
off
idea
the-
Well, it's your
clarify.
motion.
So-
Sure. And I would say, what I want to exclude from the stay is the voting on the boundaries.
You want to exclude that from the stay, so you don't want us to vote on boundaries at our next meeting.
No,
No, the other
Okay.
way.
the other way, I'm sorry.
So you want to include that.
You could vote a month from now on the boundaries,
Okay,
is
so
what
I
I'm
don't-
saying.
Okay, is that
Okay,
enough for?
but
Now, how do we
all-
word
but all
that?
the planning
For everything else, you're saying, right?
is a go.
That's my understanding.
Everything, all the
All the-
planning.
That all we're staying is closing of the buildings, sale of the buildings, and now active marketing of the buildings. And the implementation of a boundary adjustment that may or may not be adopted next month.
Yeah, I like
But
that.
I'm not comfortable, I mean, I want criteria of what planning means. That's far too ambiguous for me to at least.
I don't think we have planning in here anymore, right? I mean, I think it's just closing the schools, selling
Everything
the
else
buildings
goes
and marketing,
forward.
and then the implementation of boundary changes. I think the rest of the planning can still happen.
Okay, so planning for everything, so I think then that has to be included in it. And what that,
Well, how do you put that in?
well,
If you're
planning
staying-
for,
You're staying stuff now.
Right, so this is the stuff we will
right,
do.
right.
So everything else we will do.
Everything else moves forward. But I can appreciate what Kristen's saying is that
Right.
the sixth grade model is based upon savings from Bold, right? And so,
But I think by
we're
what we're
taking a
doing-
risk.
By what we're doing, we're still allowing them to do
Exactly,
that.
we're still allowing, but no, if we adopt a new model, like George said, you gotta pay for it either way.
Yeah, but the argument that Fritz brought up earlier, you still got
Right,
the intangible of student
If
count.
we,
So I mean, horse apiece.
but, so at least from my perspective, everything goes forward. The only thing that we're doing is we're not gonna close the buildings till after we get a decision. We're not gonna sell the buildings before the decision, and we're not gonna market the buildings. I wasn't aware we were even marketing, but
And we're not going to implement boundary changes.
right. And we won't implement whatever the boundary changes are.
But you're essentially voting on multi-age classrooms for next year then.
Correct.
Because if we make an impasse and put things on hold,
What are you putting on
But I
hold?
think that's what was in the resolution, but I think we're saying we're only staying on these things. So I think we're saying everything else can move forward.
but can you
as
do that?
Planned.
You can, I mean, we're all taking a leap of faith here. We're taking a leap of faith that
Can you?
we're right, and we're gonna have the funding for that. I mean, I think there's people in this audience who would love that we're not multi-grading.
It goes back a little bit to what Mr. Knack said earlier, is that we can do anything. I mean, if we go ahead and don't do the multi-grade, I mean, if we hold back on that, let's say we go ahead because we want to, for kids and teachers, limit multi-grading, and we do that for this next year. We're taking a little bit of a leap of faith if we aren't looking forward at a different configuration of our schools. We also have a lot of different areas that can be cut besides the multi-grading. So there's lots of options and things to think about. I'd prefer not to go out to families, and it feels a little bit like a setup saying, well, we aren't going to multi-grade because of this, but then we're going to have 10 the next year. So I think that's a decision you'd have to have as a board, and we'd have to have more conversation about its priorities. Where are we going to prioritize it? If it's a priority for us to not have the multi-grading, then that obviously has to come from somewhere else.
But that's what I want people to understand, is that there may be unforeseen, that we don't know today, but cuts to programs and services, or is there not? I just
No,
want to
there would be.
understand that.
There would be. There would be.
So if
That's the slide that we showed about what we're trying to do is be thoughtful and show people that the implications of not, there are lots of things that happen when you move to fewer buildings. And one of the things we've talked about the whole way through is really the ability to balance class sizes
Right.
more. So we aren't going to be able to do that. And some of the things that we planned on, we wouldn't be able to do.
But you wouldn't be able to do it if we lost this lawsuit.
Correct. So that would be, right, so that's where the conversation, we'd have to say, we are still X number of buildings, multi-grade is going to be a part of our life unless we decide to, prioritize it differently and cut a different program or staff.
So my understanding is that what you showed to us is if we would have gone with the resolution we were given, then you couldn't keep going with all of that, but I think we've narrowed it down to just these 3 things, and so I think you would still be able to go forward with all of what you're planning, just not implementing the boundary changes, selling the buildings, or closing the schools. I mean, the actual closing the schools. So I think that all the planning stuff can still go forward. That's what I understand.
But what are they going to plan for? They don't know. I mean, it's just, we have to give direction, and right now we're not giving direction. And we have to,
So tell me why, because I feel like this is not a lot in the grand scheme of things, that it's just these 3 things.
but
So
you
I'm
said
confused.
boundaries. You said not.
Implementing the changes, so that means we could still vote on them, but, which it wouldn't be implemented anyway till 2017.
Right, but it would,
So they can still plan for that.
Denise, I need your.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Agreed that they won't actually go into place until the buses start running in August or September or whatever the calendar date is for 17. However, I am accepting, legally, I'm looking at applications January 15th with notification, and that's whether it's alternate or open enrollment, between January 15th with notification by February 15th for where those kids should go. If I don't have an active map, whatever that looks like, I don't have any idea how to send kids to buildings. Because if implementation means that the recommended boundary changes that's coming out of committee is in play, I can't say kids are in zones. I don't have an active map anymore for 17, 18 because we have a new elementary school. I have no map. I wouldn't even have an idea of where kids were going because I can't plan on a map that no longer exists and a map I can't implement.
But doesn't it seem, Kristen, that regardless of something Bob mentioned earlier, even the possibility, and maybe that's a possibility that to some is very remote, that if the board doesn't prevail, that you have to have a fallback?
Oh, absolutely, Mike. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying what I'm trying to relay is if the committee got back together and gave an alternate map, and we can do that, we can create an alternate map. The problem is with no implementation of a boundary, which map am I going by because I don't have an existing map?
So if you can implement by 1/1, you'd be okay. I mean, all that stuff happens before then.
It does. It's a
I
parent
amended it-
decision, but it wouldn't impact procedurally me not having any idea where kids are zoned or how to send them or what sections are filled. I mean, because that's like blowing up the whole district.
So if I made an amendment that we have a stay until December 31st, 2016, and then the stay goes away, and then you could just go with what the plan is that has already been adopted.
I'm not comfortable with saying that that's okay. You've heard that I just wouldn't have an active map. Somehow, I'm just asking, please give me an active map.
I don't understand why you want to put the date on there.
Well, I think if we have a date, and then the stay goes away December 31st.
No, not if the Court of Appeals hasn't
But
acted on it.
But he said we could put a date, right? Yeah, you.
And Peter said we
Peter
couldn't.
said no.
I didn't say you couldn't. Here's, and Mr. Knack can correct me if I'm wrong. You put a date till December 31st. We don't have a decision from the Court of Appeals yet. He applies to extend the stay because all of his good work goes kaboom if the stay ends and you do the things that they don't want to have happen before we know what the court's going to decide.
So he comes back to us, and at that point, we can say yes or no to extending the stay. Is that accurate?
Yep. And then you have to ask staff what that means.
And Mr. Kanak, truly, I mean no disrespect. This is to my fellow board members. I feel like we're going above and beyond trying to make allowances and appease and find an amenable compromise for the other side, if you will. And so that's where I'm struggling. I don't think it's Mr. Kanak's decision to decide what we get to put forth and what we vote on. I think that is for us to deliberate and to vote, and
Yeah. I'm just saying at this point, and that's what we're attempting to do, is to clarify where we are. And so this motion may not prevail, but at least people know what they voted for or against.
Kristen, let me try one more time. So if we use the language in the proposal, you will bring next board meeting the boundary recommendation. We'll vote yes or no. If we vote yes, the principals can begin to have their open houses, they can have staff, they can have kids mentor, they can do all that kind of work. We get to next year, October 15th, is that when you start the,
That's when, I
Open
think it
and
opens
alternate.
October 1 to January 15th.
okay, so we get to October 1.
Still fine.
Okay, when do we stop being fine?
January 15th.
Okay, so we're putting our trust in the Court of Appeals to be done with their work by January 15th. You can continue to do everything, right?
I can,
Yep,
absolutely.
yeah, your office can
My office
continue to
can.
do. So what's our hangup?
What's with how about curriculum and teaching and learning?
All of that.
Continues.
Done, right?
What was that?
My understanding is if you're still talking about the resolution just having the no sale of buildings with the active marketing and no closing of schools, the curriculum and all those things still continue.
Right?
We would continue to go through with as, again, we would, if that's not on the, that's not part of the resolution, then we would have to assume
Yep.
that the board is planning for us to plan for 17, 18 with the school buildings not being open from a curriculum standpoint.
Right, I
I don't know
mean,
how else to answer it, but
right.
that would be what the direction I guess we would take.
Peter, is that the way you take it?
Board member, your question begs the question.
I just saw a
It's-
reaction.
My reaction is we need to understand what it is and what the implications of it are. And this is where the rubber meets the road. What does staff do with what you've decided? And if you want to implement a policy in this resolution of X, it needs to be clear enough that they know whether they're violating it or not with what they're doing. And I don't know how to say it any clearer than that. And so on the same page, however long it takes, I don't think there's a shortcut.
Could we say we will stay implementation of the boundary adjustments until the decision of the Court of Appeals or January 15th, 2017?
You're going to not make any boundary decisions until
No.
January?
We're gonna make the
Stay
decision.
implementation of any boundary decision until January 15th, 2017.
So I guess I'm
Or
just,
sooner.
Yeah, if you
Why do
get a
we need it?
decision.
Why do we need the date?
Because I think
Kristen
what
needs-
she's saying is there's a concern that if the Court of Appeals hasn't made a decision
By January
by
15th?
January 15th, 2017, we have no we have no busing boundaries.
She has work to do that she wouldn't be able to do.
We wouldn't be able to go up to the 15th. We'd
Yeah,
have to
no,
look
I-
when our
December
board meetings are and
31st
when
or-
things happen, so you aren't here on New Year's, as much as I like being with y'all.
Yeah. December 15th.
I guess one of the arguments that Fritz brought forth was people want to plan. They want to plan for their children's education. So I guess that's why I keep bringing up these boundaries, is because all these families, they want to know what the schools will be for them in fall of 17. So what I'm struggling with is, I believe we have a responsibility to make a decision so that families know what schools they will have.
Until the Court of Appeals may overturn it,
Which is what we're doing.
right? I mean, they would know. We could say, yeah, here's where you're going, but they could come in and,
Correct,
okay.
correct.
Wanted to get
Correct.
that.
So Kathy, are you uncomfortable with the planning or with not having to be able to implement? Or both?
I guess what I'm uncomfortable with is, we don't plan or implement, that's staff. But that's what we're doing, and you can see, we've been doing this for hours, you can see that there's confusion, and it isn't our role, but I think we all know that there are implications. And I just want people to be very aware of the implications. And what I am struggling with is, if we put something on hold, what is the impact on moving forward to providing better educational services for our kids? And what I don't understand is if you and your team will be able to do your work that we are holding you accountable for.
Well, an example
That's my
of the,
concern.
when we talk about the implementation, and I get the, from my understanding, most of the work has been done. I mean, we were ready to bring a recommendation to you this evening. Based on, for boundaries.
Yes.
For boundaries. So we were ready to bring that. And if we say, well, we're going to vote on it, but we aren't going to implement and we're going to wait, it just seems like we're making it messier. I mean, I understand that for families, that seems it's a more definite step towards what the closure is, and that might be difficult, but it's just as difficult for, it's difficult for everyone no matter what, but what it does is make it messier for the planning, because if we've done the work for the boundaries and you adopt them next month, let's say that you do, then what good does it do to really say, well, we aren't going to implement till January 15th? We aren't really going to implement until the next fall. But what it does is mess up things when you look at alternate enrollment and open enrollment and kindergartners coming in, all the things that Kristen's been talking about.
Staffing.
Yeah.
Like, a whole new building that we haven't boundaried for.
Yeah. So it does impact it. I mean, it's, when you look at this, I mean, not the sale of buildings and the active marketing, not the closing of schools, those aren't something that are going to happen till after it's done anyway. I mean, although I know there's rumors about all kinds of unique things for those buildings, that we haven't even had conversations with those. It's really the other work that we'd like to do to be able to do it well and implement it well and not keep folks' hands tied when they need to do that work. And, we need to do the work to make the transition easier for families. This it doesn't impact us. I mean, we're going to do the work, but it really is trying to make it smoother for families.
Anything else? Are we ready to vote on your proposal?
I got one other question, sorry.
All right.
So are we tying your hands with this resolution?
The implementation of the boundaries, I think, is tying our hands with that. It's not tying our hands. I mean, we've done the work where it's making it, if you want to come back in December and change that, I mean, that would give Kristen, I just don't see the benefit of doing that, but because there's not going to be that much done differently between now and December. We're going to be watching numbers. We have to start looking at the staffing. you can come back and look at December. I don't know what you really gain by having that date on there.
Yeah, and I was being kind of facetious, but if we said, I mean, you're not gonna implement the boundaries till you have to, which is what date? When would we implement these boundary changes?
Again, the actual boundary changes go into place when the yellow buses start moving around our district.
In August of 2017?
Where the deadline comes in for me is when I'm working with, and for Kathy too, because it's going to be staffing, what comes into play. And again, if that map had 10 elementary schools, if that map has 7 elementary schools, however that looks, it comes into play when we start the open and alternate enrollment process, which then puts kids into particular buildings, which then rolls forward into the human resource department, which then creates staffing for those. I mean, that's when it all comes into play. The actual physical implementation doesn't happen until September or end of August or whatever the date is.
But if the Court of Appeals rules in December of 2016, what we plan for can either will go forward or not, depending on that decision. We're not implementing anything at that point.
Correct.
So the concern becomes if we're tying your hands to implementing and we don't have a decision before.
The implementation is where the challenge comes in. Because I need to I will legally need to make decisions in between January and February 15th.
Will you, if this gray is if this stay is granted, how would you deal with the gifted and talented program?
Wouldn't do anything.
It's a really good question. I think part of the conversation with that has been one of the merits of having GATE move to the old Forest Hill area was to be able to do different things with transportation. Those routes all depend on GATE moving out of. If we're keeping GATE where it needs to be, or where it is because it's in Oak Park right now and we aren't expanding it, then we wouldn't do the changes.
But you could still do the planning, right? I mean,
Yeah, we could. I think it would be, I think we have many GATE parents who've been waiting the last 6 months for us to make a decision, would like to be part of that planning and talk about what that might look like.
I guess where I'm uncomfortable is it just seems like this decision is going to have an impact of the work that you and your staff are trying to do.
Yes, I mean, it is. I mean, we need a year to do this well with all the things. I mean, that goes back to the second slide, our work to improve student results. Our responsibility is to improve student results, and the programs and things we have on that slide are what we think will get us there. It's a lot of interconnecting parts for that. So if you're trying to decide, should we do this or not? I mean, you can argue that, we could do it if Bowl doesn't go through. We could not do it if Bowl doesn't go through. I think the hardest part is any of the second guessing. I mean, thinking about, all right, are we going to do boundaries? If we are, they have to be done by January 15th. That means we need to have a decision from the board about December 15th if we're going to continue the stay. From what we're hearing, it sounds like we might not have a decision by December 15th. There are so many moving variables, but for me, when it comes down to it, we are kind of, we're between a rock and a hard spot either way we go, right? But I would rather err on doing this well and planning for families when I look at 8,300 kids. And this isn't just our elementaries. You have to remember some of the things that we're looking at, reducing class sizes and things we want to do for secondary, it's all one big package. And staffing is one big package. I mean, it's what we do at the elementary impacts our secondary. What we do with elementary and secondary impacts our specialists. So there's just a lot of interconnecting parts. And we want to implement, and we want to implement well.
Any others? Okay, so what we're voting on is Mr. Potachek's proposal as described by Mr. McKeel. Barb, let's do a roll call vote on this.
Are you ready to vote?
I believe so.
Board Chair Hepner?
I'm going to vote yes to the proposal, and I'd like to make a couple comments while I do that. We heard about the educational value and some harm that would be done, and again, all respect for Mr. Knack, but I think the marks of a great education aren't dependent on whether or not a school is a blue ribbon school. And I'm going to use his own kids. The high school was a blue ribbon school before any of your kids got there, and I enjoyed having Andy in class. He was a great student. I don't think the fact that we hadn't had a blue ribbon for a while negated that. I think things like teacher-student relationship, class size, diversity are all marks of a great education, and I think all of our schools are great. I think the teachers in this district are fantastic and are all willing to work with kids. Secondly, I think one of the original comments was that moving forward would create hardships for parents seeking to plan for their kids' education, and to me, I heard a lot in the recommendation for boundaries about B2, a number of parents who were happy that we were moving forward with that. I would not have voted for this resolution without the implementing, staying the implementing of boundaries and not being in there. Another comment was that we should avoid wasting resources on implementation of bold. Well, that assumes a win could do that, or a loss could do that with the Court of Appeals. So I didn't see that as being strong one way or the other. The idea of home values was an interesting one for me. It's a permanent versus a temporary in my mind. As Mr. Knack pointed out, we have a very strong K-12 school district, and one wonders if having a strong K-12 system that emphasizes academics, arts, and athletics doesn't trump a neighborhood school. And I don't know, I'm not a realtor, but I know that we have had a very strong school district. I'm sure the time that your kids attended and participated in arts and athletics, they got a great education. That's what we hope to do, frankly, with this bold proposal. But that having been said, I will vote yes on the resolution.
Vice Chair Potachek?
Yes.
Clerk O'Loughlin?
So just to clarify, you said voting yes on the resolution?
Mike's resolution.
Stay closing of the buildings, stay sale of buildings and active marketing, and stay implementation of any boundary adjustments.
So a couple comments for me, and I am not a lawyer, but reading between the lines, I still feel that there's far too much ambiguity that exists in the language as it's stated in terms of what can be done and what authority is granted to our superintendent to do her work for students. I vote no.
Director Buchholz?
I guess where I'm at is, I think about what I've been hounding the district to do, and that is to be proactive and to improve the educational services for our kids, put us in a more financially stable, sustainable organization. So I believe that in order for the superintendent and her team to do her work, I think that they need to move forward. So to me, that means a no vote on the stay.
Director Lehman?
My decision is based upon what the law says, and according to the law, it says, when deciding whether to grant the stay, you must balance the appealing party's interest in preserving the status quo so that effective relief will be available if the appeal succeeds against the interests of the public or the prevailing party in enforcing the decision and ensuring that they remain secure in victory while the appeal is pending. If that truly is the standard, I fully supported Bold. I believe that Bold will prevail. I'm going to argue contrary to Mr. Knack that his position will succeed. I don't think it will, but we will soon find out. But with regards to the legality of the stay, I think that this stay allows the status quo, but also doesn't prevent the district from moving forward with the planning process. And if that truly is the law and that we're bound to follow that, I think in this case, that is the right decision, so I'm voting yes.
Director Pearson?
I'm also voting yes. I won't comment at this time.
4 yes, 2 no. Motion
Thank you.
carries to stay.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. We do have some other action items. The first is a letter of agreement for transition of Valley Crossing Community School. Ms. Hoheisel.
Thank you, Board Chair Hepner, Superintendent Pontrelli, school board members. On March 10th at our school board meeting, you had heard me give a report on essentially separating the joint powers agreement and what we call the tails agreement that followed, how the money and the resources was going to be divided with the ending of Valley Crossing Community Schools. It was voted on to table that agreement due to questions regarding, and I believe Tom was going to talk to Jay Squires, the attorney, as far as the sale proceeds from South Washington County School District, and when we were expected to receive those, and some interest resolution and what that was. I believe someone has spoken with Jay Squires, and that we do have at least, I wouldn't say a favorable resolution, but we certainly have a declaration on his behalf saying that there was no agreement as far as when we would receive the proceeds and the interest payment. So it would be administration's recommendation that you move forward with the agreement in front of you as far as this motion. Any questions?
Okay, could I get a motion to approve the letter of agreement for transition? Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Comments or questions?
Well, I was the one that raised the concern about the interest payment. I still truly believe that we are entitled to that interest from January 1st till this closing date. I think that it was clear from the three of us, myself, Kathy, and Mike, that at that closing, as well as Tom Nelson, that the actual date was January 1st. However, in the interests of moving this forward and in the spirit of compromise, which I think is an important thing, I am in favor of this, but I think that it's something I'll remember when, if issues come up with South Washington County in the future.
Tom, just a question, how much are we talking about?
I think we figured about $23,000.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions?
Well, it wasn't because of lack of effort on your part, I know you tried hard. Thank you.
Yep. And also Kristen and Denise did a lot of the legwork too, trying to pursue
Thank you.
this, so.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the letter of agreement for transition of Valley Crossing Community School, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, oppose? Thank you. Transportation contract and lease agreement, Ms. Hoheisel.
Thank you again. Every 4 years, a school district is to go out and seek, we sought quotes as far as, or proposals, as far as your transportation services. This coming school year, the 16-17 school year, is the year that we are out of our contract with Minnesota Central, and so we started the process. And beginning July 12, 2016, the Stillwater Area Public Schools advertised for written quotations for student transportation services. The district subsequently conducted a service provider informational meeting on Tuesday, February 9th, 2016. And the purpose of that meeting was to answer questions about the district's specifications and student transportation requirements. And we had a sign-in sheet at that meeting, and it indicated that 7 service providers and 10 individuals were in attendance. On February 23rd, 2016, Stillwater Area Public Schools received written quotations for transportation of resident public, non-public, and charter school children. The written quotation process had an option for direct negotiation authorized by Minnesota Statute 123B.52 Subdivision 3 for the procurement of this contract, and disclaim usage of any other contract procurement options allowed under applicable law. We had received 3 quotations, and direct negotiations commenced with Minnesota Central School Bus, as they were the lowest quotation per tabulation review. And what this means is, if you were to look at the dollar amounts that were listed, so if you have 5 hours for a regular bus, if you have time for a special ed bus, if you have time for a monitor, all of those vary between the people that had provided us with a quotation, but when you tabulate what we actually run based on the dollar amounts that they quoted, Minnesota Central, the bottom line of Minnesota Central, came in the lowest. We did receive 2 other quotes. I'd say one was in its entirety with the full service offering of Minnesota Central, and then the third was more for your type 3 vehicles, which is your special education vehicles. So we entered into negotiations with Minnesota Central. Their original quote was for a 9% increase in year 1. And the way that we went out for the request for quotations was, we said year 1 with the possibility to negotiate years 2, 3, and 4. And why it was designed that way is because year 1 is easily determined. We still have a bus garage. That it's not ours, but everything for next year is set. We kind of throw our pieces in the air a little bit when we move into the 17-18 school year. You know, obviously our new bus garage, or what we anticipate to be our new bus garage. What will bell times look like? You know, how many routes will we be running? Kind of all of the things we've been talking about for essentially the last 6 months are unknown. And so we couldn't define what that would look like for a service provider, so that's why we left it up to negotiations. As we worked through, in the contract that is in front of you, says the final contract is for a 6.5% increase in year 1, a 2% increase in year 2, a 2.5% increase in year 3, and a 2.25% increase in year 4. And during the conversation, this is mainly to allow for the replacement of buses and employee pay increases to help with retention. One of the wonderful things that we're living in today is we are in a recovery market where there's jobs are available. Unfortunately, when you're in the transportation industry, it's hard to find drivers when the employment market is favorable. And so they have to make it enticing, you can't, we were able to get away with maybe a market that was more in the favor of the companies back when the recession was in, and that's no longer the case. A couple of other considerations as I looked at this contract and we looked at this contract was, it's not just about, in part in a bid situation, you have to take the lowest bid. But we've talked about this with our construction contracts too. It's kind of what is that best value? Because you want, we're moving 7,900, 7,800 kids every day, and it's, it's more than just a dollar amount. What other services, what other things that do we really need to look at to make sure our students are safe, to make sure that we're protected, to provide the best value for our system. So the dollar amount, by far and away, that was the best price we received, and I would say in comparison to other metro districts, we are well within line of what that should look like. But there's a few things that I'd like to call attention to, and the list is long, but Minnesota Central, we do have a long-standing relationship with them now, and they do provide a lot of services above and beyond for us. And in part, they maintain the DOT files on all of our district minibuses and SUVs. They provide updated accident protocol manuals. Then after they are developed, each school is given a copy. They train our drivers for Title III. They participate in Peaceful Bus Initiative at Lake Elmo and Afton Lakeland, providing buses and drivers for the schools involved, and they paid for the labor and the fuel. When you're looking at kind of the safety standard, I know that can be in the news at times. With the Minnesota State DOT bus and van inspections, records have been very good at each of the last 8 years. They hold a federal DOT authorization on all buses and have maintained very good ratings with inspections that have all been good. Point being, they bring quite the service to our district above and beyond the price. This conversation and all of the detail that went behind it was had with the finance working group that consists of the 3 board members. I think we're almost on Friday, so it's almost 2 weeks ago at this time that conversation was had, but I'd certainly open it up to any questions as it relates to the transportation contract. One new piece for us, though, in addition, because it is part of one declaration, is there was a lease agreement drafted that would be for our new bus garage. And we were working through the details. We haven't had that before. We would be slated to receive revenue, and you were all provided with a draft of that in years 2, 3, and 4 of the contract for the rental of that, of our bus garage. I know, I believe Tom Oswald is still in the audience. He is my direct contact and the leader of the Minnesota Central School Bus that serves Stillwater schools. Very pleased with the relationship. He is on top of everything. So I guess I will open it up to questions.
Okay, could I get a motion and a second to approve entering into a transportation contract and a lease agreement with Minnesota Central?
So move.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Comments or questions?
Kristen, is there any discussion, or maybe this is, do any of the buses have Wi-Fi on them? Have we thought about that?
I can answer that one, and I don't know.
Go ahead.
We actually I talked with, I believe it was, is it Tom? There he is back there. Yeah, we talked about the possibility of maybe doing something like that, and then I know John Perry, our Director of Technology, also talked about that, at least trying to pilot that, and even for some of our longer routes, maybe starting with some of the longer routes for kids. So it's a possibility. Of course, there's a cost, but there's starting to be some pretty creative ways. So I think the message I got from Tom earlier this year is he'd be happy to talk to us about that.
I think it's important. I think just for what you indicated, some of these bus rides, but with the advent of technology, these kids can be studying and, doing their homework on that bus, so.
I have 2 questions. Can you remind us about what the total transportation cost is a year?
Sure. We are looking at, and there's a little bit of variance between this year and next year because we actually are down 1 student contact day. But with the transportation budget runs about 4.7, 4.8 million per year for the routes and that.
Okay, thank you. And then my other one was just about gas. So I saw in here somewhere, so if gas prices are lower than projected, do we get some money back?
So there is a fuel clause split that whether it goes up or down, we share how that looks.
And has this year been good or not much impact? It has been good for us, right? Thank you.
Was the lease agreement subject to negotiations the same as the regular transportation contract?
It was, and as I had indicated when I had sent out the draft version, there were some areas that maybe were up for a little bit more debate than others. But yes, we had a conversation on it. There was some rationale on why not to put that on the base rates and actually receive it as revenue. And so we did have a conversation on, what does the annual rent look like? Is there a inflation factor attached to that? What does the maintenance look like? Snow plowing, who's responsible for routine maintenance, who's responsible? So there was conversations regarding almost every aspect. There is a component, and it's the very last item numbered in the lease agreement that says this will open up to talk about certain maintenance items and conditional use permits, because we don't know right now what that's going to look like, because we haven't defined where our bus garage is going to be or what it's going to look like, so we can't identify everything in contract. It will not change the price, it will not change the maintenance that already exists, but for example, if we have a wash bay, who would be responsible to switch over the brushes? I mean, whatever that looks like, it's those sorts of things. It's not going to change the integrity of the lease agreement. There's just some more details that we just don't know right now. But almost every line was talked about.
Any other questions?
Just general, when there's a problem, what's your experience been with how they've responded to issues or concerns, or how they've been working to work with? My experience has been very good. I will say, with an accident, that is. And you never want that, and we've been relatively fortunate this year where we seem to have had a few accidents, but we haven't had students on the bus when it's happened. And they are on the spot almost immediately. We have pictures, and it's getting worked through, dispatch, making sure the kids are safe. Are they being released? Absolutely, that's fabulous. We do have, I would say, customer service. Nobody is perfect. Snow days, again, that falls just maybe on us as much as it falls on Minnesota Central as far as how do we make it work. Safety of the students always comes first, but I personally, again, no one's perfect. I personally haven't heard anything that would indicate that they aren't performing where they should be. Being new to this position, not new to transportation, I've worked with Tom in the past, but being new to the Stillwater position, and honestly, just the enormous amount of routes and mileage that we cover in a day, it's been a great comfort to me to have them in place. Great.
Okay, this is off the subject a little bit, but is there some app that is for tracking buses? Did I hear this?
Yes, that it's, when I had actually started with the schools, it was kind of at its inception point that it was going to be where a parent could look and they'd see it's 3 stops down and kind of maybe help, when buses are running late and where it is and what's going on. To this point, it hasn't been able to come to fruition. There's a little bit of challenge with the vendor to get that to work. So we're still trying. That's still the goal. We're just hung up on it a little bit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any others?
I just want to thank you. You did a great job on this. I know that, sometimes we don't say thank you enough. You saved the district money, which is important for me as a taxpayer, and through your efforts, we got a great contract here, so thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All those in favor of approve entering into a transportation contract and lease agreement with Minnesota Central, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And as long as you're up there, extend the 2015-16 resolution to assist with class size reduction for 2016-17, Ms. Hoheisel.
Thank you. On January 7th, you had put into place a resolution to set $1 million aside for class size reduction, and that resolution was, it had a term on it that would expire at the end of this fiscal year, which would be June 30th. It would be administration's request that you extend that term into next school year with the remaining dollars.
Okay, could I get a motion and a second to approve the remainder of the funds to address class size issues in 2016-17 school year?
I'll make a motion to
Thank you.
accept.
Second?
I'll second.
Shelley. Questions or comments?
A question, the very last part of that, with remaining funds, what does that mean? Is that a limit?
So we've spent some this year. And so I would guess, and I might have a little bit different number than others, but I would say we're probably looking at $500,000 to $600,000 that we haven't spent, honestly, just because it's, when you're halfway through a year, it's pretty hard to implement and spend down $1 million in staffing. And so I would say we have more than half of this money still remaining to be able to move forward into the next school year.
Yeah, and I'm very, very pleased that it's available and for the purpose, I think is excellent. I just was very curious how much and
Yeah,
how. Okay.
we're definitely on the use less than half side, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
So is this going to go toward multi-grading, or is that yet to be decided?
That's yet to be decided. I think we have to look at our secondary numbers also.
The bottom line, though, is this, the motion, as it's listed, will go to class size one way or the other, one place. Okay.
Right.
Anything else?
And these are excess funds that were sitting in our general fund, is that right?
Right, so on January 7th, we had, we were looking at a 9+% unassigned fund balance, and we had taken $1 million for transition, $2 million for technology, and then $1 million for class size that was reserved, essentially making our unassigned fund balance 5%. So it's money that's sitting there, but it can only be used for a designated purpose.
And so expenses like legal fees for fighting this lawsuit may reduce that, so we may not have that money available going forward for class size reduction.
It would reduce the unassigned fund balance. It would not reduce this because I cannot touch this other than for class size.
But we wouldn't have the ability to transfer money from the unassigned into this at some point. If
Correct. You couldn't go the other way. The only thing you could do is undo this.
Yeah.
So Kristen, this is still in line with the board's fifth goal that talks about a balanced budget? Okay, thank you.
All those in favor of approving that the remainder of the funds go to address class size for the 2016-17 school year, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Thank you.
Can I?
Were you going to say one other
I'm like,
thing?
oh, and I just realized, so when you're looking, when we move forward with the budget as we move into next year, we're balanced. We know this is one-time money that is purposely being spent, but when you look at revenue versus expenditure, that will look out of line. But that will happen with the technology and all of the things that were set aside because it's coming from a different fund balance. Just looking at revenue expenditure, it'll appear as though we're out of line.
Okay.
Okay,
And you're going to explain that
I
to
will.
us?
I will.
Our next action item is a resolution rejecting consolidation plan between ISD 832 Matamidi, ISD 834 Stillwater as proposed in the approved plat and supporting statements. Superintendent Pontrelli.
I don't have much to add besides the resolution, but I did receive a message from Matamidi's school board that they did vote down the consolidation request this evening and did not have anyone there for public comment on it.
So I guess I read the resolution and then we do our voting, huh? Okay. Pursuant to a due call and notice thereof, a regular meeting of the School Board of Independent School District Number 834, Stillwater, State of Minnesota was duly held 14th day of April. Following board members were present and the following were absent. Board member George Hepner, I guess, introduced the following resolution and moved its adoption. Resolution rejecting the consolidation plan as proposed in the approved plat and supporting statement. Whereas the Washington County Auditor received a petition to consolidate Independent School District Number 834, Stillwater, Minnesota, and Independent School District Number 832, Matamidi, Minnesota, pursuant to Minnesota Statutes 123A.4A, Subdivision 2, and whereas the auditor verified that at least 50 voters residing within the two school districts signed the petition, and whereas the auditor prepared the plat and supporting statement for the proposed consolidation and submitted same to the Commissioner of Education pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 123A.48, Subdivision 2, and whereas the Commissioner of Education held a public meeting at Stillwater Junior High School on March 16th, 2016, pursuant to the request by petition of 20 resident voters living within the area proposed for consolidation. And whereas after examining the plat and supporting statement and considering the information presented at the public meeting on March 16th, 2016, the Commissioner of Education approved the plat as submitted on January 29th, 2016, and approved the supporting statement outlined in the auditor's January 29th, 2015 letter with certain modifications as set forth in the Commissioner's March 21st, 2016 letter, a copy of which is attached hereto as Exhibit A and incorporated by reference. And whereas the Commissioner established that date of consolidation would be effective on July 1st, 2017, and whereas pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 123A.48, Subdivision 10, within 45 days of the approval of the plat approved by the Commissioner, the school board must either adopt or reject the plan as proposed in the approved plat. Now therefore be it hereby resolved by the School Board of Independent School District Number 834, Stillwater, State of Minnesota, that the plan for consolidation of Independent School District Number 834, Stillwater, Minnesota, and Independent School District 832, Matamidi, Minnesota, as proposed in the plat and supporting statement as modified and approved by the Commissioner of Education is hereby rejected. The motion for the adoption of the foregoing resolution was duly seconded by Board Member
I'll second.
Tom Lehman, and upon vote being taken thereon, the following voted in favor and the following voted against the same. So I guess we need to, do we roll call vote that one?
Yeah.
We have discussion.
Question? Yeah. One of the things, I was present at the hearing that night and listened to a number of people come forward and talk about this. But I believe Tom Melcher, as he explained it, both districts would have to support this in order for it to happen. So the fact that Matamidi has already said no, it's really a moot question for us.
Roll call vote, Barb, on this?
Board Chair Hepner.
Yes.
Vice Chair Potacek.
Yes means what?
To reject.
That you voted in favor.
Okay, yes. Or that you vote?
To reject
To
it.
reject.
It's hereby
Yes,
rejected, yes.
yes. Thank you for your patience.
Clerk O'Loughlin.
Yes.
Director Buchholz.
Yes.
Director Lehman.
Yes.
And Director Pearson.
Yes.
6 yes.
Thank you. Whereupon said resolution was declared duly passed and adopted. So it was passed as rejected. Wow. You lawyers. School board update, superintendent report.
I'll keep this short. I just wanted to mention, Annette had shared with me some information. Our preschool numbers are up. They're already about 20 kids over what they normally are. We're 20 kids past what we are at the end of the year. Usually our kids and families don't register until summer or even fall, and we have families who are registering ahead of time, and part of that she attributes to the program changes. And then talking to the parents who are interested in that program, they really wanted a full-day program. So Annette and her staff have worked really hard to prepare a program that will get our kids ready for kindergarten. I'm really appreciate her leadership on that and are excited about that. And then I got to spend some time with our high school students here in Rachel Stiles' journalism classes this last week, and enjoyed spending some time with our high school kids. And they were talking about how much they love Stillwater schools, but how much they love band, music, art, acting, all those kind of things that we know give them a well-rounded education. And then I was able to spend time today in our kindergarten students over at Lake Elmo with the Music Means More class, doing some tutoring and reading with them. And I know that some of our staff here, and some of you have done that already too. That was a good way to spend some time today, so.
Thank you. We had a learning session on March 31st, and among the topics discussed were the Stillwater High School construction timeline. And for the public, I think somebody asked about the Relay for Life. When we had that, that's going to be at Miller Stadium, and the Special Olympics is going down to Lakeville South for this year. So it's good that they found new homes for a little bit. We had a boundary recommendation update, which was the revised boundary recommendation. Business, John Perry talked about the technology infrastructure contracts that we approved this evening. Superintendent Pontrelli spoke about the legislative platform. We talked about our superintendent and Carissa talked about community engagement and decision-making, and we talked about policies 1, 2, and 3, and we've got 4, 5, and 6 on the docket going forward. Listening session tonight, did Paula and I were the representatives. What did we want to say? No, how many speakers? We had I think about 20 speakers, variety of topics. We didn't get much time to actually have discourse with them, but about bond referendums, about BOLD. A teacher spoke about a board making decisions for all students. A couple speakers talked about parent choice. One of our speakers talked about thanking the superintendent for looking forward for our Spanish-speaking families. Had some discussion about the lawsuits. Paula, do you have any?
Let's see, a couple of residents spoke about just in terms of, again, modeling the ways in which we engage with one another, a call for civility. Speaker asking for us to engage in some self-reflection. Let's see, when a person from outside of our community saying that she is watching and as a citizen of a broader community is very invested in what our district is doing and is tuned in, and people talking about some of the messaging that has taken place over the last couple of days.
Variety of topics, Just a couple quick things. EMID board meeting, you should have your notes on the laptop. Our new location is 6063 Hudson Road, Suite 218. If you can think of the corner of Century and 94, we're behind the Green Mill. If anybody'd like to go take a tour, give me a call and I'd be happy to walk you over there if you'd be willing to buy pizza at Green Mill. The other one would be number 2 on there, Mary Bussman, who's EMID's Director of Professional Development, presented to the board on the progress of equity coaching and SEED. Both these projects were funded by educational grants awarded from the EMID fund balance. About 100 teachers are taking part in SEED and 125 equity leaders and administrators are working on equity coaching. So she saw those as very successful. The other thing is I wandered up to Lily Lake's Carnival on Saturday, and I want to thank, I know a lot of people get to carnivals at their various liaison schools, but, you know, there were a lot of staff working, there were a lot of parents working, there was a lot of people in attendance. It's just a really good,
Event.
a good activity, and I don't think, those are the things that we don't thank staff or thank parents for enough. You know, I'm sure they made a little bit of money, but it was mostly the community of those parents and staff members getting together, and I did win a silent auction item too, so it was a totally successful trip up there. So those are mine. Anybody else want to give it a shot? Tom?
I'm good.
Okay. Paula?
I'm good.
Mike?
I'll talk a little bit about 9/16. There's a couple events here. One, and this is the most important thing that happened at our last meeting, which was on April 5th, and that was a presentation about the impact of trauma. And it's a former employee, and George, you may know him, Kevin Horst, mental health specialist. But he presented information on childhood trauma, its impact on social, emotional, physical, and academic development. And what you can see and what Connie wrote here in terms of the talking points is that the board was very, very moved by his presentation. And Denise and I were talking briefly a little bit before, and he did this in about 15 minutes, and it wasn't the fact, I wouldn't depreciate that. It wasn't that it was a particularly articulate as, wow, he really made us aware, and not only of the problem, but some of the successful ways of dealing with it. Earlier, I think all of you, and it was in the talking points again, but Shelley had shared this with you, that next Monday, April 18th, there is a film screening from 3 to 5:30 p.m. and from 6 to 8:30 p.m. And the movie is called Paper Tigers. And what it is a testament to what the latest developmental science is showing. Just one caring adult can help bring about the cycle of turning about the cycle of adversity in a young person's life. So again, it's free. It's at Capitol View Auditorium, 70 West County Road, B2, and it's in Little Canada. And if you don't get this or you're interested, call me and I'll tell you how to get there, but I think it's well worth the time. Then also what I wanted to mention a little bit is there was a staff recognition, and April is the month that we celebrate that at 9/16, and they recognize people for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and 45 years of service. And I think Kathy's going to like hearing this. The ed assistant is Linda Z, 45 years she's celebrated. And I kind of teased her about that. You must have been very, very young when you started. And she was. She came as a co-op student out of high school. And she's stayed there ever since. So I thought that was very, very powerful. The last thing I'm going to mention really is contract approval. And the board approved a contract settlement with the manager, assistant manager group, and the changes included a 2% schedule improvement with a 403 match increase. And that contract was approved for 2 years. And one other thing I'd mention, it won't affect most of you, but the board meeting date change is that starting next year, September 2016, we're going to switch to the second Wednesday. And that's because one of our newest acquisitions have regular board meetings on Tuesday. So that minor switch. But that's it.
Thank you. Shelley?
Okay, I'll go really quick. Going off something George said about our staff, my daughter and I went up to the Autism Walk at Oak Park on Saturday, and there were a lot of staff members, and Nate Cox, the principal, was on a corner snapping pictures, and he sent me one later thanking me for coming, so really, really great staff support at that event. I attended the World Savvy Fair at Oakland yesterday, where the kids chose different topics of global issues that are happening. I learned about a lot of things I didn't know about, and it was a fun day. I also got to read with kindergartners at Lake Elmo, and just it's fun to see the spectrum of kids, and they are some precious little ones there that are learning to read, so it was fun. Today I attended the MSBA Phase 3 on board governance. I don't have anything for you yet, but I'll type something out and send it. Tomorrow I'll go to Phase 4, community engagement. The last thing, I just wanted to thank all of you for, I know all the time that you've put in the last few months, and I just appreciate all of that, and I appreciate the discussion tonight, even though it was long and hard, and for all the work that admin has done, and for all of you sitting here and everybody watching, and how you've been engaged and invested, and I appreciate all the time that you've put in.
Thank you. Kathy?
Real quick, I went to the Afton Lakeland PTA meeting on Monday night, April 11th. Their carnival is Saturday, April 23rd. And as Kristen mentioned, they're doing that Peaceful Bus training, which has gone really well. And then I volunteered at Lake Elmo on Tuesday, April 12th, through Rotary with the kindergartners too. So that was good.
Okay.
That's it.
Any working group reports?
We have a meeting at the end of April,
Yes, the 27th.
policy group.
You're welcome to join it. Well, no, we'll have.
Yeah, you can. Well, I could stay home.
The only thing, George, I would mention is I've been invited to a presentation at Parents United tomorrow morning.
Okay.
So hopefully, and Mary Ciccone will be giving an update, the legislative report.
Well, wish her well from our board.
Thank you.
Okay, we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, third.
First, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We're done.